The computer screen glowed in the dim office, displaying images that made Natasha's stomach turn. Her own face stared back at her from a dozen different angles, vulnerable and exposed in ways that made her skin crawl. Medical photos, intimate examinations, moments when she'd trusted completely and been utterly betrayed. She stood frozen in the doorway of Dr. Gregory Carson's private office, her hand still on the doorknob, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But the evidence was right there on his monitor, a gallery of photos arranged like merchandise, complete with price tags and buyer information. Her photos, her body, her most vulnerable moments turned into products for sale on what looked like a dark web marketplace. 2 weeks earlier, everything had been normal. Well, as normal as life got when you were 28 years old with a chronic medical condition that required regular monitoring. Natasha had worked hard to build a good life despite her diagnosis. She had a job she loved as a physical therapist, helping people recover from injuries and regain their strength. She had a small but comfortable apartment in Queens. She had routines and boundaries and carefully maintained control over her world. And she'd had trust in Dr. Gregory Carson, the physician who'd been treating her condition for the past 18 months. He'd come highly recommended, with credentials from prestigious institutions and a practice that specialized in complex cases like hers. When she'd first walked into his office, nervous and afraid about what her diagnosis might mean, he'd been kind and reassuring. Professional, respectful. He'd explained her treatment options thoroughly, answered all her questions with patience, and made her feel like her concerns mattered. Over 18 months of regular appointments, she'd built what she thought was a solid doctor-patient relationship based on mutual respect and trust. She'd been vulnerable with him in ways she'd never been with anyone, sharing not just her physical symptoms, but her fears about what her condition meant for her future. Could she have children someday? Would she need surgery? How much would her quality of life be affected? He'd listened to all of it with what seemed like genuine compassion. He'd taken thorough medical histories, performed necessary examinations, ordered appropriate tests. She'd trusted him completely with her health, with her body, with her future. And the entire time, he'd been photographing her without consent. The realization hit her like a physical blow, making her knees weak. How many times had he asked her to change positions during examinations? How many times had she followed his instructions without question, trusting that everything he did was medically necessary? She thought back to appointments, trying to remember if she'd ever seen a camera, ever heard a shutter click, ever had any indication that something wasn't right. Nothing. He'd been so smooth, so professional, that she'd never suspected a thing. Today's appointment wasn't even supposed to involve seeing Dr. Carson. She was scheduled for routine blood work with the lab technician, a quick in-and-out visit before heading to her afternoon patient appointments. But she'd arrived 15 minutes early, and the waiting room had been empty, and when she'd gone looking for the lab tech, she'd noticed Dr. Carson's office door slightly ajar. She should have knocked. She should have announced herself. But something had caught her eye through that gap, the distinctive glow of a computer screen in the otherwise dark office, and curiosity had pulled her forward. Now she stood there, staring at evidence of a betrayal so profound she couldn't fully comprehend it. The marketplace was sophisticated, clearly designed for a specific clientele. Categories organized by body type, age, procedure type, search functions and filters. User ratings and reviews like this was any other e-commerce site, instead of a platform for exploiting vulnerable patients. Her cursor hovered over one of her photos, and the details made her want to vomit. Date uploaded. Purchase price. Buyer information partially obscured, but showing usernames that suggested multiple people had bought access to her images. 3 separate buyers, the screen indicated. 3 strangers had paid money to see photos of her most vulnerable medical moments. She couldn't breathe. The office felt too small, the air too thick. How many other patients were in this database? The gallery seemed to scroll endlessly, dozens if not hundreds of women, all unknowingly violated by doctors they trusted. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped her out of her paralysis. She spun toward the door just as Dr. Carson appeared, stopping short when he saw her standing in his office. His expression shifted in an instant, friendly professionalism draining away to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "Natasha," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "You're early." She couldn't find words. Her tongue felt thick, her throat closed tight around the accusation, trying to force its way out. She gestured weakly toward the computer screen, and his eyes followed the movement. She watched him make rapid calculations, saw the moment he decided there was no point in denial. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. The soft click of the latch sounded ominous in the sudden silence. "You've been taking photos of me." The words came out strangled, disbelieving even though the evidence was right there. "During my appointments. You've been selling them." "Medical documentation," he said smoothly, like he'd prepared this explanation in advance. "Standard procedure for complex cases. The marketplace is for professional consultation with specialists. That's not what this is." Her voice was getting stronger, fueled by outrage breaking through shock. "Those are prices. Buyer reviews. You're selling intimate medical photos of your patients without their consent." His expression hardened. "This is a very profitable arrangement, Natasha. One I've spent years developing. You need to understand that you've put me in a difficult position by discovering it." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Fear spiked through her anger, sharp and cold. "I'm leaving," she said, moving toward the door. "I'm going to the police. To the medical board. To anyone who'll listen." He didn't move to stop her physically, but his next words froze her in place. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. The people who purchase these images, they're not the kind of people you want knowing your identity. Some of them are quite dangerous, and they've already paid for access to you specifically. If this arrangement ends badly, if law enforcement gets involved, well, I can't guarantee your safety. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you." His voice was cold now, all pretense of professional kindness abandoned. "You have no evidence. It's your word against mine. A patient with a documented history of anxiety against a respected physician. But more importantly, you've seen something you shouldn't have. That makes you a liability. Walk away, Natasha. Forget what you saw here. It's the only smart choice." She stared at him, this man she'd trusted with her most vulnerable moments, and understood with terrible clarity that he meant every word. He'd built a network of exploitation, and he'd protect it by whatever means necessary, including threatening her. Maybe worse than threatening if she pushed him. Without another word, she turned and ran. Through the office, past the startled receptionist, out into the Manhattan street where late afternoon crowds moved in oblivious rivers of humanity. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs shook, until she was blocks away from that office of horrors, until the adrenaline started to fade and leave her shaking and nauseated in a doorway. What was she supposed to do? He was right that she had no evidence beyond her own word. She hadn't taken photos of the screen, hadn't documented anything. And his threat about the buyers, about dangerous people who knew her identity, that wasn't empty. She'd seen the usernames, the transaction details. These weren't casual voyeurs. These were people willing to pay substantial amounts for access to vulnerable women's private medical moments. She needed help. She needed someone who could fight back against people like Dr. Carson, who could protect her from the buyers he'd warned her about, who existed outside the normal channels that would dismiss her concerns or move too slowly to keep her safe. But who? The police would need evidence she didn't have and time she probably didn't have. A lawyer would be expensive and slow. Her family lived 3 states away and couldn't protect her from this kind of threat. Her friends were good people but had no experience with anything like this. She started walking, no destination in mind, just movement to burn off the fear and shock. The sun was setting, painting the Manhattan buildings in shades of orange and gold that felt cruelly beautiful given the horror churning in her stomach. People passed her on the sidewalk, absorbed in their phones or conversations, living normal lives where doctors didn't betray your trust and strangers didn't buy photos of your vulnerability. That's when she noticed the car. A dark SUV moving slowly along the curb, keeping pace with her walking speed. Her heart started hammering again. She told herself she was being paranoid, that not every vehicle was a threat. But when she turned down a side street and the SUV turned with her, paranoia crystallized into certainty. They'd found her. Somehow, impossibly fast, someone from that marketplace had identified her and was following her. Maybe Dr. Carson had warned them. Maybe they had tracking capabilities she couldn't imagine. It didn't matter how. What mattered was the SUV stopping 30 feet ahead of her, doors opening, 2 men stepping out with expressions that promised nothing good. Natasha ran. Again. Her therapist's sneakers pounded pavement as she fled down the darkening street, hearing footsteps behind her, heavy and purposeful. She had no plan, no destination, just pure survival instinct driving her forward. Turn left, cut through an alley, emerge on a busier street with more witnesses, more potential help. But they were faster. She could hear them gaining, could hear one of them calling to the other about cutting her off. Her lungs burned and her legs screamed protest, but she kept running because stopping meant facing whatever those men intended to do. She burst onto a main avenue, nearly colliding with pedestrians, and that's when she saw him. A man exiting an upscale restaurant with two associates, tall and imposing in an expensive suit, dark hair and sharp features that would have been handsome if they weren't so severe. She had no reason to think he'd help, no evidence he was anything other than another wealthy Manhattan businessman, but desperation made her bold. She ran straight at him, her momentum carrying her into his personal space before his security could react. "Please," she gasped out. "Please help me. They're following me." The man caught her shoulders, steadying her, and when his green eyes met hers, she saw sharp intelligence assessing the situation in seconds. He saw her terror, saw the men who'd been chasing her now hesitating at the mouth of the alley, saw something in the whole scenario that made him make an instant decision. "Get behind me," he said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made her obey without question. She moved behind him, feeling his solid presence between her and the threat, and watched as the two men who'd been chasing her stopped short. They looked at the man protecting her, recognition and calculation flashing across their faces, then at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them, and then they were backing away, disappearing into the gathering darkness like they'd never been there at all. Natasha's knees gave out. She would have collapsed if the man hadn't turned and caught her, his grip strong and steady, and somehow reassuring despite the fact that she had no idea who he was or why those men had retreated at the sight of him. "You're safe," he said quietly, and something in his voice made her believe it. "My name is Dante Rossi, and I think you need to tell me exactly what kind of trouble you're in." The men had vanished into the night, but Natasha's heart still hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't process what had just happened. One moment she'd been running for her life. The next this stranger had positioned himself between her and danger with the kind of calm authority that made grown men retreat. "You need to come with me," the man said, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a question, but somehow it didn't feel like a threat either. "You're not safe out here." Natasha looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair styled with casual precision and sharp green eyes that seemed to catalog everything about her in seconds. His suit was expensive, the kind that cost more than she made in a month, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who was used to being obeyed. Mid to late 30s, she guessed, with the kind of face that would be handsome if it weren't so intensely focused on her. "I don't," she started, then stopped. She didn't know him. Getting into a car with a stranger should terrify her as much as the men who'd been chasing her. But something in his eyes, some quality she couldn't name, made her feel less afraid than she had since she'd fled Dr. Carson's office. One of the men with him, younger with sharp features and watchful eyes, appeared at his elbow with a set of keys. "The car is ready, boss." Boss. That single word should have sent warning bells screaming through her mind, but she was too exhausted, too scared, too overwhelmed to process what it might mean. The stranger extended his hand to her, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. "My name is Dante Rossi. I promise you, I'm not going to hurt you. But whoever those men were, they'll be back, and you don't want to be on this street when they do." She stared at his hand. This was insane. She was a physical therapist from Queens with a sensible apartment and a careful life, and now she was considering getting into a car with a man called Boss by his associates because her doctor had been selling her medical photos to criminals on the dark web. When had her life become a nightmare? But the alternative was going home alone, to her apartment where Dr. Carson knew her address, where those men could find her. She thought about the look in Dr. Carson's eyes when he'd caught her in his office, the cold calculation that said she was a problem to be eliminated. She thought about running through the streets with footsteps behind her, the certainty that they were going to catch her. She took Dante's hand. His grip was warm and steady. and for the first time in hours, she felt something other than pure terror. The car was a black Mercedes, sleek and expensive, with windows tinted dark enough that she couldn't see inside until the door opened. The interior smelled like leather and something subtle she couldn't identify, cedar maybe. Dante slid in beside her after a brief word with his associates, and within seconds they were moving through the Manhattan streets. Natasha pressed herself against the door, maintaining as much distance as possible in the enclosed space. Now that the immediate danger had passed, reality was crashing down on her. She'd just gotten into a car with a complete stranger. A stranger who made dangerous men retreat with a look, whose associate called him boss, who clearly had the kind of power that made him confident he could protect her. What was she thinking? "You're safe," Dante said quietly, not looking at her, but somehow aware of her panic. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I meant what I said. I'm not going to hurt you." "Who were those men?" The question came out shakier than she intended. "I don't know yet." His jaw tightened slightly. "But I intend to find out. Tell me what happened. Why were they chasing you?" Natasha closed her eyes, the memory of Dr. Carson's office flooding back with nauseating clarity. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. My doctor, she had to force the words out, he's been taking photos. During examinations. Intimate photos. Selling them on the dark web." She heard Dante's sharp intake of breath, felt the atmosphere in the car shift to something harder, more dangerous. When she opened her eyes, his expression was cold fury barely contained. "Your name?" he asked. "Natasha. Natasha Bennett." "Natasha." He said it like he was committing it to memory. "Did he threaten you?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Said I'd seen too much. That I needed to understand the consequences of going to the police. And those men were, I don't know, buyers maybe, people he works with." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I just ran. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I just ran." The car slowed, and she realized they were pulling into an underground parking garage, the kind with security gates and cameras everywhere. "Where are we?" "My home," Dante said simply. "You'll be safe here while we figure out what to do next." The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the quiet hum of machinery. Natasha studied Dante's reflection in the polished doors. His face was unreadable now, that cold fury replaced by careful control. She wondered what he was thinking, whether bringing her here was something he'd regret. The penthouse was stunning in a way that made her feel immediately out of place. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, city lights glittering like scattered diamonds. The furniture was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive materials. Everything about it screamed wealth and power, a world so far removed from her own that she might as well have stepped onto a different planet. "You can stay in the guest room," Dante said, gesturing down a hallway. "It has its own bathroom. You'll have privacy, but I need you to stay here tonight, at minimum, until I can assess the threat level." Natasha turned to face him. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. This isn't your problem." Something flickered in his eyes, something dark and painful that was gone almost before she could register it. "Let's just say I have experience with men who exploit vulnerable people. I make it a point to stop them when I can." He moved past her toward an open kitchen that looked like something from a magazine, all marble counters and professional appliances. "You look like you need something stronger than water. Wine? Or I can make tea if you prefer." "Wine," she said, then wondered if drinking alcohol with a strange man in his penthouse was the worst decision in a night full of bad ones. But her hands were still shaking, and she needed something to take the edge off the fear that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in her chest. He poured 2 glasses with economical movements, then gestured to the comfortable-looking sectional facing those impossible windows. "Sit. Tell me everything, from the beginning." So she did. Perched on the edge of the sofa with a glass of red wine she barely tasted, Natasha told him about her diagnosis 2 years ago, the chronic condition that required regular monitoring, the trust she'd built with Dr. Gregory Carson over 18 months of appointments. She told him about arriving early today, seeing the door ajar, the fatal curiosity that made her look inside. His computer screen was open to some kind of marketplace. Dark web, I think. There were photos, dozens of them, of different women. And then I saw, her voice broke slightly, I saw myself. Multiple photos from different appointments. Exposed. Vulnerable. With price tags next to them. Dante's knuckles went white around his wine glass, but his voice remained steady. Did you take any evidence? Photos of the screen? She shook her head miserably. I was too shocked, too scared. I just froze. And then he saw me, and everything happened so fast. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those intense green eyes. Then he set down his glass with careful precision. Natasha, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. What your doctor is doing, it's not isolated. There are networks of these predators, men who exploit positions of trust to victimize vulnerable people. They trade photos, information, access. They're organized and they're dangerous, especially when exposed. She felt cold despite the warmth of the apartment. You're saying this is bigger than just Dr. Carson. Much bigger. And the men who were chasing you, they were likely buyers or associates protecting their investment. If you'd gone home tonight, they would have found you. The wine glass trembled in her hands. What am I supposed to do? I can't go to the police without evidence. It's my word against a respected physician. And if what you're saying is true, if there's a whole network, she couldn't finish the thought. Dante leaned forward, his gaze locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You let me handle it. I have resources the police don't have, and I'm not bound by their rules. But I need you to trust me and stay here where I know you're protected. She wanted to ask what resources, what rules, what exactly he was offering to do. But part of her was afraid of the answers. Instead, she asked, why? Why do you care about this? His expression shifted, something raw and painful crossing his face before he could lock it down. Because 5 years ago, my sister was a victim of one of these networks. A trusted therapist who did the same thing your doctor did. Took intimate photos during sessions, sold them to the highest bidder. The shame, the violation, she couldn't live with it. The past tense hit Natasha like a physical blow. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Gabriella was 23. Dante continued, his voice careful and controlled in a way that suggested he was holding back an ocean of grief. Beautiful and trusting and too kind for this world. When she found out what had been done to her, when she understood that strangers had seen her most vulnerable moments, it destroyed her. She took her own life 6 months after the discovery. Natasha's throat tightened with sympathetic pain. She set down her wine glass because she couldn't trust her shaking hands anymore. Dante, I don't know what to say. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the determination burning in those green eyes like a banked fire. Say you'll let me help you. Say you'll stay here where I can keep you safe while I dismantle whatever network your doctor is part of. I couldn't save Gabriella, but I can save you. The weight of his words settled over her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about his sister, about all the other victims she'd seen in those photos, about stopping men like Dr. Carson from destroying more lives. But it was also about getting into deeper water with a man she didn't know, a man who clearly had dangerous connections and the kind of power that came from places she probably didn't want to examine too closely. She thought about her apartment, small and safe and familiar. She thought about her job, her normal life, the careful boundaries she'd built around herself after her diagnosis. All of it felt impossibly far away now, like it belonged to a different person in a different life. Then she thought about the look in Dr. Carson's eyes, the men chasing her through dark streets, the certainty that she couldn't face this alone. I'll stay, she said quietly, but just for tonight. Tomorrow we figure out next steps. Something that might have been relief crossed Dante's face. Tomorrow, he agreed. For now, you should rest. You've been through hell tonight. He showed her to the guest room, which was larger than her entire bedroom at home and decorated in soft neutrals that should have been calming, but somehow made her feel even more out of place. The attached bathroom had a walk-in shower with rain shower heads and heated floors, luxury she'd only seen in magazines. Before you ask, I'm just wondering, where are you watching this from tonight? Maybe you're safe at home, or perhaps you're somewhere you'd rather not be. Have you ever had your trust betrayed by someone who was supposed to help you? Someone in a position of power who violated that sacred responsibility? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us heal from them. After Dante left, closing the door quietly behind him, Natasha sat on the edge of the massive bed and finally let herself process everything that had happened. Hours ago, she'd been a normal person with a normal life, and now she was hiding in a mafia boss's penthouse, because that's what he had to be, There was no other explanation for the way those men had responded to him, for the casual wealth and power he displayed, for his talk of resources outside the law. She should be terrified. She should call someone, a friend, her sister, someone who could help her think clearly. But who could she call? What would she even say? Help. My doctor's been selling nude photos of me, and now I'm staying with a dangerously attractive stranger who might be in organized crime? The worst part was that despite everything, despite the insanity of the situation, she felt safer in this stranger's home than she had felt in weeks. Maybe months. There was something about Dante's quiet certainty, the way he'd positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation, the genuine pain in his eyes when he talked about his sister, that made her believe he meant what he said. He would protect her. She just wasn't sure what the cost of that protection might be. Natasha changed into the oversized t-shirt she found folded on the bed, clearly left there for her, and climbed under covers that felt like clouds. Through the window, Manhattan glittered and pulsed with life. Millions of people living their normal lives while hers spun completely out of control. Tomorrow she would think clearly, make rational decisions, figure out how to reclaim her life from this nightmare. Tomorrow she would be smart and careful and sensible. Tonight, she would let herself feel safe in the protection of a dangerous man, and try not to think too hard about why that safety felt more real than anything she'd experienced in a very long time. Natasha woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the scent of coffee drifting through the air. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of last night crashed back with nauseating clarity. Dr. Carson's computer screen, the chase through dark streets, Dante Rossi's green eyes and quiet promise of protection. She sat up slowly, taking in the guest room in daylight. Expensive linens, tasteful art on the walls, everything carefully chosen and immaculately maintained. This was the home of someone with money and power, someone who existed in a world completely different from her own. The smell of coffee grew stronger, mixed now with something else. Bacon? Was he cooking? Natasha found clothes folded on the chair near the door, simple but clearly expensive. A soft gray sweater and black pants that looked about her size, tags still attached. He must have had someone bring them early this morning. The thoughtfulness of it made something warm unfurl in her chest, even as the implication unsettled her. He had resources, connections, people who would shop for a stranger at his request without question. She changed quickly, splashed water on her face in the marble bathroom, and followed the scent of breakfast. The kitchen was flooded with morning light, and Dante stood at the stove with his back to her, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray Henley that showed off broad shoulders. He moved with easy confidence, flipping something in a pan with the practiced ease of someone who actually knew how to cook. It was so domestic, so unexpectedly normal, that for a moment she could almost pretend this was just a regular morning and not the aftermath of her life imploding. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "I hope you slept. Coffee's fresh if you want some." "How did you know I was here?" she asked, moving toward the coffee maker because she desperately needed caffeine. "I heard your door open." His voice held a hint of amusement. "I'm a light sleeper. Comes with the territory." She poured coffee into a mug that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget and added cream from the refrigerator. "What territory is that exactly?" He glanced over his shoulder, those green eyes assessing her carefully. "We should probably have that conversation. But let's eat first. You need food." Natasha wasn't sure she could eat. Her stomach still twisted with anxiety and fear, but when he set a plate in front of her at the breakfast bar, the food looked and smelled too good to refuse. Scrambled eggs cooked perfectly, crispy bacon, fresh fruit arranged artfully on the side. It was the kind of breakfast she'd make for herself on a good weekend, comfort food prepared with care. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and she found herself studying him in the morning light. He was probably 37 or 38, handsome in a way that was almost severe, with strong features and that perfectly styled dark hair. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, the way they tracked everything with sharp intelligence, the way they softened slightly when they landed on her. "Thank you," she said finally. "For this. For last night. For not." She wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. "For not being the kind of man you should be afraid of?" He offered quietly. "Natasha, I need you to understand something. My world is dangerous. The people I associate with, the things I do, They're not what you're used to. But I have a code. I protect people who need protecting. I don't exploit vulnerability. She set down her fork carefully. You're in organized crime. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Yes. My family has been involved in certain business operations for 3 generations. I handle security and enforcement for our interests. Security and enforcement. She knew what that meant, what it had to mean. Violence. Intimidation. The kinds of things people whispered about in movies and television shows. You hurt people. When necessary. His gaze didn't waver. I don't apologize for what I do, but I also don't do it indiscriminately. There are rules, lines that shouldn't be crossed. Men like your Dr. Carson, they cross those lines. They prey on the vulnerable. That makes them fair targets. The phone in his pocket buzzed, and he pulled it out with a slight frown. I need to take this. It's about your situation. He moved away toward the windows, speaking in low tones she couldn't quite make out. She watched him, this dangerous man who'd made her breakfast, who'd given her shelter, who talked about violence and protection in the same breath like they were 2 sides of the same coin. 2 more men arrived while he was on the phone, let in by some security system she hadn't even noticed. They nodded respectfully to her, but didn't approach, instead moving to Dante's office visible through an open door. She caught glimpses of computer screens, heard fragments of conversation about servers and encrypted files and offshore accounts. This was his world. Not just the beautiful penthouse and expensive clothes, but the dangerous men and quiet conversations and resources that existed outside the boundaries of law. She should be terrified. Every reasonable instinct said she should make an excuse and leave, go to the police, handle this through official channels. But she'd seen the look in Dr. Carson's eyes. She knew how these men operated, how they hid behind credentials and respectability while destroying lives. The police would need evidence, warrants, time she probably didn't have. Dante was offering something faster, more direct, and possibly her only real chance at stopping this. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral in a way that made her stomach drop. What did they find? He sat down beside her at the breakfast bar, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. My tech expert, Marco, he's good at what he does. He found Dr. Carson's network. It's bigger than we thought. How big? 17 doctors in the tri-state area alone. Thousands of photos going back 5 years. Multiple buyers, some of them very dangerous people. He paused, and something in his eyes made her brace for impact. Your photos were sold to 3 different buyers 2 weeks ago. The room tilted slightly. 3 people. 3 strangers had paid money to see her most vulnerable moments. Images she'd never consented to. Violations she'd never known about until yesterday. She felt sick, violated in a way that made her skin crawl. Natasha. Dante's hand covered hers on the counter, warm and steady. Look at me. She did, fighting the tears that threatened to spill over. This was everything she'd feared when she'd been diagnosed. Every nightmare about her body betraying her and making her helpless. She'd trusted Dr. Carson to help her, to treat her condition with respect and compassion, and instead he'd turned her vulnerability into profit. I trusted him, she whispered. For 18 months I went to his office, let him examine me, believed he was helping me. And the whole time he was taking photos, selling them, making money off my medical condition. Hey, Dante's other hand came up to cup her face gently, turning her toward him. This is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. He's the predator. He's the one who violated every ethical boundary and law. Not you. A sob broke free despite her best efforts to hold it back. And then she was crying. Really crying. All the fear and shame and violation pouring out of her in waves. Dante pulled her against his chest without hesitation, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her shoulders, holding her together while she fell apart. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her, strong and steady and safe, while she soaked his expensive Henley with her tears. She could feel the controlled strength in his body, the way he held her carefully like she was something precious that might break. Despite everything she knew about what he was, what he did, in that moment she felt safer than she'd felt in years. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown. Sorry, I didn't mean to fall apart on you. You're entitled to fall apart. His thumb brushed away a remaining tear with unexpected gentleness. What was done to you? It's a violation. You get to feel everything you're feeling. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw something in those green eyes that made her breath catch. Anger on her behalf. Yes, but also understanding. And beneath that something warmer, something that made her hyper-aware of how close they were, how his hand still cradled her face, how his eyes had dropped briefly to her lips before returning to meet her gaze. "Tell me about your diagnosis," he said quietly. "Help me understand what he exploited." So she did. Perched on the breakfast bar stool with Dante's presence solid and reassuring beside her, Natasha told him about being 26 and getting the news that would change her life. The chronic condition that required monitoring, the fear that she was broken somehow, less than she'd been before, the careful management, the regular appointments, the vulnerability of exposing your body to a doctor and trusting them to see you as a patient, not a person to be exploited. "I felt like my body had betrayed me," she said. "Like I couldn't trust it anymore to be normal, to be healthy. And then to find out that the person I trusted to help me was using that vulnerability, that fear, to make money." She shook her head. "It feels like I've been violated twice. Once by my own body, and then by him." Dante listened without interrupting, and she could see him processing every word, filing away details with that sharp intelligence she was beginning to recognize. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're not broken," he said finally. "You're dealing with a medical condition. That doesn't make you less. It doesn't make you vulnerable in the way you think it does. You're still strong, still capable. What Dr. Carson did, that's on him. It doesn't reflect on you at all." The certainty in his voice made her want to believe him. She'd spent 2 years thinking of herself as damaged somehow, marked by this condition that required constant attention. But the way Dante looked at her, there was no pity, no judgment, just genuine respect and something that looked almost like admiration. The afternoon passed in a strange kind of suspended reality. Dante worked from his office, door open so she could see him at his desk, phone to his ear or typing on his computer. Men came and went, always respectful, always treating her like she belonged there. She caught herself studying the dynamics, the way they deferred to Dante, the quiet power he wielded with barely a word. Marco, the tech expert, was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-20s with nervous energy and sharp eyes. He showed her what he'd found, the servers and encrypted marketplaces, though he was careful not to show her the actual photos. "We're mapping the entire network," he explained. "Every doctor, every buyer, every transaction. By the time we're done, we'll have enough to burn it all down." She wondered what burning it down meant in Dante's world, but she didn't ask. Evening came, and she realized she'd spent an entire day in his penthouse, watching his world operate around her, feeling strangely comfortable in this dangerous space. He ordered dinner from somewhere expensive, spread it out on the dining table like a proper meal, and they ate together as city lights began to glitter in the windows behind them. "You don't have to stay here," he said suddenly. "If you want to go home, if this is too much, I'll arrange protection for you there. But I prefer you stay. It's safer." She should want to leave. She should be desperate for her own space, her own life, distance from this man and his dangerous world. But sitting across from him with the remains of dinner between them, she realized she didn't want to go. Not yet. Maybe not at all. "I'll stay," she said, meeting those green eyes that seemed to see right through her. "For now." Something that looked like relief crossed his face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Good," he said simply. Later, after she'd retreated to the guest room, Natasha stood at the window looking out over Manhattan and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. Fear, yes, still present, and probably permanent until this threat was eliminated. Violation and anger at what had been done to her. But underneath all of that, something else entirely. Something that had to do with the way Dante looked at her, the way he'd held her while she cried, the way his presence made her feel safer than she'd felt in years despite knowing exactly how dangerous he was. She was drawn to him, despite everything, despite the violence and the darkness and the organized crime. She was attracted to a man who scared her almost as much as he protected her. It should terrify her, this growing connection to someone from a world she didn't understand. Instead, standing in his guest room wearing clothes he'd provided, protected by resources she couldn't begin to comprehend, she felt something she hadn't felt since her diagnosis. She felt like maybe, possibly, everything might actually be okay. 3 days had passed since Natasha had first entered Dante's world, and she was beginning to understand what it meant to live in his orbit. They'd fallen into a routine that felt simultaneously strange and comfortable. Mornings together over coffee, his careful questions about how she'd slept, whether she needed anything. Days where he worked from his office while she tried to occupy herself with books from his extensive library or watching the city pulse with life far below. Evenings sharing meals and conversation that ranged from carefully neutral topics to deeper discussions that left her feeling seen in ways she'd never experienced before. She was learning things about him. That he took his coffee black and strong, drank it from the same mug every morning. That he was meticulous about his appearance, but moved with casual grace around the penthouse, like the expensive suits and perfectly styled hair were armor he wore for the outside world. That he read voraciously, mostly history and philosophy, books marked with careful notes and margins. That when he laughed, which wasn't often, it transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. She was also learning that she liked being near him far more than was probably wise. "You need clothes," Dante said that morning over breakfast, his tone matter-of-fact. "You can't keep wearing the same rotation. We're going shopping." Natasha looked up from her eggs, startled. "I can't ask you to buy me clothes. You've already done too much." "You're not asking. I'm telling you." His eyes held a hint of amusement. "Besides, if you're staying here, you need more than 3 outfits. It's practical. If I'm staying here." The words hung between them, acknowledging what neither had fully addressed. She'd said for now 3 days ago, but they both knew she wasn't leaving anytime soon. Not until the threat was eliminated, not until Dr. Carson's network was destroyed. Maybe not even then, though she didn't let herself examine that thought too closely. "Is it safe?" she asked. "To go out? I'll have security with us. 2 of my best." He said it casually, like having armed bodyguards was the most normal thing in the world. "And we'll stay in areas I control. You'll be protected." An hour later, she found herself in the back of the Mercedes again, but this time Dante sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that made her want to lean closer. 2 men followed in a second car, Marco and another man she'd been introduced to as Vincent, both carrying themselves with the kind of alertness that suggested they were constantly assessing threats. The boutique he took her to was in Soho, the kind of place with no price tags visible and assistants who sized up your worth the moment you walked through the door. But when they entered with Dante, the energy shifted immediately. The manager appeared from the back, greeting him by name with the kind of deference that spoke of either familiarity or fear, possibly both. "Whatever she wants," Dante said simply, then settled into a chair near the dressing rooms like he planned to wait. Natasha tried to protest, tried to be reasonable about prices and practicality, but the assistant was already pulling pieces with expert efficiency. "Try these," she insisted, ushering Natasha toward a dressing room. "Mr. Rossi has excellent taste." It should have felt awkward, trying on clothes while Dante waited just outside, but somehow it didn't. He'd comment occasionally when she emerged to look in the 3-way mirror, his opinions surprisingly thoughtful. "That color suits you. The cut isn't right. That one, definitely that one." His attention was focused entirely on her, and she found herself hyper-aware of his gaze tracking her movements, the way his eyes darkened slightly when she wore something that fit particularly well. She was trying on a deep blue dress that the assistant had insisted she at least look at when she saw him. Through the boutique window, a man standing across the street, watching with focused intensity that made her blood run cold. Mid-40s, expensive suit, face she'd seen before but couldn't immediately place. Then memory clicked into focus with sickening clarity. She'd seen that face on Dr. Carson's computer screen, one of the buyer profiles, a man who'd paid for access to photos including hers. Dante must have seen her face change because he was on his feet immediately, moving to her side. "What's wrong?" She couldn't speak, could only raise a shaking hand to point toward the window. "That man. He's one of the buyers. I saw his profile picture on Dr. Carson's marketplace." Dante's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The casual patience vanished, replaced by something cold and lethal that made her understand exactly why people feared him. He moved to the window, positioning himself between her and the glass, studying the man with predatory focus. "Vincent," he said quietly, and one of his security team was there instantly. The man across the street. Gray suit. Bring the car to the back entrance now. Things happened very fast after that. Vincent spoke into his phone while Marco appeared at Dante's other side. The boutique manager materialized with a concerned expression, clearly reading the sudden tension. The man across the street hadn't moved, was still watching the boutique entrance with unnerving focus. Change back into your clothes, Dante told her, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel underneath. We're leaving. Now. Her hands shook as she pulled on her original outfit, the blue dress forgotten on the floor. Through the gap in the dressing room curtain, she could see Dante and his men in quiet, intense conversation. She heard fragments, enough to understand they were planning the safest exit route, discussing whether the buyer was alone or had backup. When she emerged, Dante took her arm gently but firmly, positioning her between himself and Marco. We're going out the back. Vincent will bring the car. Stay close to me. They moved through the boutique, past the concerned manager who was already boxing up the clothes Natasha had tried on, through a storage area, and out into a narrow alley. The Mercedes was there within seconds, Vincent behind the wheel. Dante ushered her into the back seat and slid in beside her, Marco taking the front passenger seat. As they pulled out of the alley, Natasha caught a glimpse of the buyer moving toward the boutique entrance, his purposeful stride suggesting he'd intended to come inside. Then Dante's hand covered hers, drawing her attention away from the window. Did he see us leave? She asked, her voice smaller than she'd like. Probably. But he won't follow. Vincent made sure he saw us, saw who you're with. Dante's jaw was tight, fury barely contained. He knows now that you're under my protection. That alone should make him back off. And if it doesn't, then I'll make sure he understands permanently. The drive back to the penthouse was tense and silent. Natasha couldn't stop replaying the moment she'd seen that face, the visceral horror of recognizing someone who'd bought access to her most vulnerable moments. He'd been so close. If they'd left through the front entrance, she might have walked right past him. Back in the safety of the penthouse, Dante made calls while she sat on the sofa, trying to stop shaking. She heard him speaking in low, dangerous tones, giving orders, demanding information. How did he find her? How did he know where they'd be? The network had been tracking her, waiting for an opportunity. When he finally ended the calls, he crossed to where she sat and dropped down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened. I thought we'd be safe in that neighborhood. You can't predict everything, she said, though her voice still trembled. At least we saw him before he got close. I saw the fear in your face. His hand came up to cup her cheek, turning her toward him. I never want you to feel that afraid again. Natasha looked into those intense green eyes and felt something shift inside her. This man, this dangerous, violent man, was furious on her behalf. She'd seen the cold calculation in his expression when he'd spotted the threat, the immediate shift into protection mode. He would have hurt that buyer without hesitation if the man had gotten closer. Maybe worse than hurt. She should be horrified by that. She should be afraid of the violence he was capable of, the darkness that lurked beneath his careful control. But all she felt was safe, protected, valued in a way that made her chest tight. Tell me the truth, she said quietly, about your world, about what you do. If I'm going to stay here, if I'm going to let you protect me, I need to understand. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his hand still cradling her face with unexpected gentleness. What do you want to know? Everything. The violence. The rules you mentioned. What happens to men like that buyer if they don't back off? He studied her carefully, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. I enforce my family's interests. That means I deal with people who threaten us, who break agreements, who cross lines they shouldn't cross. Sometimes that means intimidation. Sometimes it means violence. I don't apologize for it because in my world, weakness gets you killed. Have you killed people? Yes. He didn't look away, didn't soften the truth. Not often, and never without cause. But yes, she should pull away. Every reasonable instinct said she should be repulsed, should put distance between herself and this admission. But she didn't move, held by those green eyes that watched her with such intensity. Does it bother you? He asked quietly, knowing what I am. It should, she admitted. It should terrify me. But all I can think about is that when that man was watching me, you positioned yourself between us without hesitation. You would have done anything to keep me safe. She paused, trying to articulate the complicated tangle of feelings in her chest. In my normal life, people see my medical condition and treat me carefully, like I'm fragile, like I might break. You see it, and you just see me. Not the diagnosis. Not the vulnerability. Just me. Because you're not your condition. You're Natasha, who survived something traumatic and is still standing. Who trusted someone and got violated and is still fighting. His thumb stroked gently across her cheekbone. You're stronger than you think you are. When he looked at her like that, with such absolute certainty, she almost believed it. The distance between them felt charged, electric with tension that had been building for 3 days of shared space, and careful conversations and moments like this where they were too close and not close enough at the same time. I don't know if I can handle your world, she whispered. The violence. The danger. This isn't what I'm used to. I know. But you're handling it now. You saw a threat today, and you stayed calm. You told me what you needed to tell me. You didn't fall apart. His face was so close now that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. You're braver than you give yourself credit for. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. So do I. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. I'm terrified of failing to protect you. Of not being enough to keep you safe. Of you looking at me one day and seeing only the monster. You're not a monster, she said, and meant it. Monsters don't make breakfast. Monsters don't hold someone while they cry. Monsters don't look at you like. She stopped, unsure how to finish. Like what? Like you're something precious. Like you matter. The air between them felt too thin, not enough oxygen for the way her heart was pounding. Dante's hand slid from her face to the back of her neck, his touch warm and sure. You do matter. More than you should after only 3 days. More than is probably wise. She knew she should move, should put distance between them before this went somewhere she couldn't take back. But she didn't want to move. She wanted to lean in, wanted to close the space between them, wanted to know what his mouth would feel like against hers. Natasha, he said quietly, his voice rough. If you don't want this, tell me now. Instead of answering with words, she closed the distance. The first brush of his lips against hers was gentle, questioning, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want space. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that should probably concern her, but didn't. She pressed closer and felt his control slip, felt the kiss deepen as his other hand came up to frame her face. He kissed her thoroughly, like he had all the time in the world and intended to use it. His mouth was warm and sure against hers, tasting of coffee and something darker she couldn't name. She felt the careful restraint in the way he held her, the leashed strength that suggested he was holding back, afraid of overwhelming her. So she kissed him harder, her hands sliding up to tangle in his dark hair, telling him without words that she wasn't afraid of his intensity. A sound rumbled low in his chest, pleasure or approval or maybe surrender, and then he was pulling her closer, one hand splaying across her lower back, while the other cradled her head with such tenderness it made her chest ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. That was, he started, then seemed to lose the words. Yeah, she agreed breathlessly. It was. They stayed like that for a long moment, close enough to share breath, letting reality slowly filter back in. The danger they'd escaped. The complicated situation they were in. The fact that she'd just kissed a man who'd admitted to killing people, who lived in a world of violence and organized crime, and she didn't regret it even a little. This changes things, Dante said quietly. I know. I can't be casual about you. It's not in my nature. If we do this, if we cross this line, I'm all in. His eyes met hers with fierce intensity. I need you to understand that. Natasha thought about her safe, careful life before this. The boundaries she'd maintained, the careful distance from anything that might hurt her. Then she thought about how alive she felt in this moment, how right it felt to be in Dante's arms despite every logical reason it should feel wrong. I'm not asking you to be casual, she said. I'm not asking for anything except, she paused, searching for the right words, except this. Whatever this is, I want to find out. Something that looked like relief mixed with triumph crossed his face before he kissed her again, slower this time, but no less thorough. When he pulled back, his smile was small but genuine, transforming his severe features into something warmer. Then we'll figure it out together, he said. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered in the gathering dusk, millions of people living their safe, normal lives. And inside, Natasha chose the dangerous man who made her feel more alive and protected than anyone in her carefully constructed world ever had. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences came from this choice, she knew she wouldn't regret kissing Dante Rossi. The morning after their kiss, Natasha woke with her heart racing and immediately questioned every decision she'd made the night before. She'd kissed a man who admitted to killing people. She'd chosen to stay in his world, to explore whatever was building between them, despite every logical reason to run. What was she thinking? But when she emerged from the guest room and found Dante in the kitchen making coffee like he had every morning, when he looked up and smiled at her with something warm and genuine in those green eyes, all her doubts quieted. He moved toward her without hesitation, one hand coming up to cup her face as he pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "Morning," he said quietly. "Sleep okay?" Eventually, she admitted. "Spent a lot of time thinking. Having second thoughts?" There was vulnerability in the question, carefully hidden but present. She stepped closer, her hands finding his chest. "No, just first thoughts. And third and fourth thoughts. But not second thoughts." His smile widened slightly, and then he was kissing her properly, slow and thorough like they had all the time in the world. When he pulled back, his expression was serious again. "My mother wants to meet you." Natasha blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. "Your mother?" "I told her about you. About the situation. She insisted on coming for dinner tonight." He looked almost apologetic. "She's protective. Wants to make sure you're being treated well." The idea of meeting Dante's mother should terrify her, but instead she felt something close to curiosity. What kind of woman raised a man like him? What would she think of the physical therapist from Queens who'd stumbled into her son's dangerous world? "Okay," Natasha said. "I'll meet her." Rosa Rossi arrived that evening like a small but formidable storm. She was probably in her late 60s, elegantly dressed with silver hair styled perfectly and sharp dark eyes that reminded Natasha immediately of Dante. She swept into the penthouse, embraced her son with obvious affection, then turned those assessing eyes on Natasha. "So you're the girl my son can't stop talking about," Rosa said, her accent carrying the musical lilt of Italian mixed with decades in New York. "Let me look at you." Natasha stood still while Rosa studied her with the kind of scrutiny that felt like it reached into her soul. She was acutely aware of her simple dress, her nervous hands, the way she probably looked completely out of place in this world of power and danger. Then Rosa smiled, warm and genuine. "You have kind eyes. Honest eyes. Good. My Dante needs someone honest in his life." Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Rosa told stories about Dante as a child, about his father who'd passed 10 years ago, about the family business without ever explicitly stating what that business was. She asked Natasha thoughtful questions about her work as a physical therapist, about her family, seeming genuinely interested in the answers. "My daughter would have liked you," Rosa said quietly as they cleared plates. "Gabriella. She had your same gentle strength." Dante had been loading the dishwasher, but he stilled at his sister's name. "Mama, you don't have to." "I want to," Rosa said firmly. She turned to Natasha. "Dante told you what happened to Gabriella?" "Some of it," Natasha said carefully. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "My baby girl was 23. Beautiful and kind and trusting. She went to therapy for anxiety, trusted a man who said he would help her. Instead, he violated that trust in the worst way. When she found out what he'd done, that strangers had seen her most private moments, she couldn't live with it. She took her own life 6 months later." The pain in Rosa's voice was raw even 5 years later. Natasha felt tears prick her own eyes, understanding the weight of that loss in a way she hadn't fully grasped before. After Gabriella died, Rosa continued, "Dante made it his mission to find men like her therapist, to stop them. He saved many women from the same fate." She reached out and took Natasha's hand. "So when he tells me about you, about what was done to you, I know he will move heaven and earth to protect you." Because he couldn't protect her. Natasha looked at Dante, saw the tight set of his jaw, the way he was avoiding eye contact. This wasn't just about protecting her. This was about redemption, about making right what he couldn't fix for his sister. After Rosa left with warm embraces and an invitation to visit her anytime, Natasha found Dante standing at the windows, staring out at the city lights. She moved to his side, close enough to feel his warmth but not touching. You don't have to carry that guilt, she said quietly. What happened to Gabriella wasn't your fault. I should have protected her. His voice was rough. I knew she was struggling. I should have paid more attention, should have questioned the therapy, should have done something. You can't save everyone, Dante. But I could have saved her. He finally turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. She was my baby sister. I was supposed to keep her safe. Natasha reached up to cup his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. You're keeping me safe. You're keeping all those other women safe by taking down these networks. Gabriella's death wasn't meaningless if it led you to this mission. She would have liked you, he said, his hand covering hers. You're both, he paused, searching for words. You're both stronger than you think you are. She just couldn't see it in herself. Tell me about her, Natasha said. The good things. Who was she before that man hurt her? So he did. They moved to the sofa, and Dante talked about his sister for the first time in years. About how she'd loved art and music, how she'd made him laugh with terrible jokes, how she'd been the light in their family after their father died. About the girl she'd been before trauma broke her, before shame and violation stole her ability to see her own worth. Natasha listened and held his hand, and understood that this was trust of a different kind. He was showing her his wounds, the guilt and grief he carried, the drive that fueled everything he did. This was vulnerability that matched or exceeded her own. When he finally fell silent, she shifted closer, her head finding his shoulder. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for listening. His arm came around her, holding her against his side. For not judging me for failing her. You didn't fail her. You loved her. Sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from their own pain. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other, processing grief and protection and the complicated tangle of feelings building between them. When Natasha finally lifted her head to look at him, the expression in his eyes stole her breath. Want and tenderness and something deeper that made her heart race. Dante, she whispered, not entirely sure what she was asking for. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking gently across her cheek. Tell me if you want me to stop. I don't want you to stop. He kissed her then, slower than before, but with an intensity that made her blood heat. She shifted in his arms, turning to face him more fully, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and necessary, and when his hands found her waist and pulled her into his lap, she went willingly. This was different from the first kiss. That had been tentative, exploratory, testing boundaries. This was deliberate and consuming, both of them acknowledging exactly where this was heading and choosing it anyway. His hands roamed her back, careful but possessive, and she could feel the restraint in his touch, the effort it took him to go slowly. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I want this. I want you. Just so we're clear. We should talk about this, he said, though his hands tightened on her waist. About protection, about consent, about making sure you're sure. I'm sure. She kissed him again, then added against his lips, and yes to protection. And yes, I consent. Enthusiastically. His laugh was low and rough. You're going to be the death of me, Natasha Bennett. He stood with her in his arms like she weighed nothing, and she wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively. The walk to his bedroom felt both too long and too short, anticipation building with every step. When he set her down beside his bed, his hands were gentle as they framed her face. Last chance to change your mind. No judgment if you do. In answer, she reached for the hem of her shirt and pulled it over her head. His breath caught, and the look in his eyes made her feel beautiful and wanted and powerful despite every insecurity her diagnosis had created. What followed was slow and thorough and nothing like she'd imagined. Dante touched her like she was precious, mapping every inch of her skin with reverent attention. When he hesitated over the small scars from her medical procedures, she guided his hand, showing him they were just part of her, nothing to fear or avoid. He kissed each one with such tenderness that tears pricked her eyes. You're beautiful, he murmured against her skin. Every part of you. She explored him in turn, tracing the hard muscle and old scars that told stories of violence he'd survived. He let her look, let her touch, giving her control and time to process what she was seeing. When she pressed her lips to a particularly vicious scar across his ribs, he sucked in a breath. Knife fight, he said quietly. For years ago. Occupational hazard. Does it still hurt? Not anymore. But your touch helps. They came together slowly, carefully, both hyper-aware of trust and vulnerability and the weight of what this meant. He was patient and attentive, checking in constantly, making sure she was okay, that she wanted this, that he wasn't going too fast. She'd never felt so cared for, so completely safe even in her most vulnerable moments. When it was over and they lay tangled together, his arms wrapped around her and her head on his chest, Natasha felt something shift deep inside her. This wasn't just physical attraction. This was connection, understanding, two wounded people finding safety in each other. Stay here tonight, Dante said quietly. Not in the guest room. Here with me. Okay, she whispered. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I should probably tell you. This is the first time I've brought anyone to my bed in over 2 years. She lifted her head to look at him. Really? Really? I don't do casual. Never have. So this, us, it means something to me. It means something to me too, she admitted. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. And for the first time since her diagnosis, Natasha didn't dream about being broken or vulnerable or less than whole. She dreamed about being safe. Morning came with sunlight streaming through windows and the realization that she was in Dante's bed, his arms still around her waist, his breathing steady and peaceful. She watched him sleep for a moment, this dangerous man who was so gentle with her, and felt her heart do something complicated and terrifying in her chest. When he woke and saw her watching, his smile was soft and genuine. Morning, beautiful. Morning, she replied, suddenly shy. They made coffee together in comfortable silence, moving around each other in his kitchen like they'd been doing this for years rather than days. It felt domestic and right and more intimate somehow than what they'd shared the night before. Marco arrived mid-morning with an update, professional enough not to comment on Natasha's obvious presence in Dante's personal space. We've located the main server facility, he reported. Dr. Carson's entire operation runs through a medical office building in Midtown. 17 doctors, all connected, all uploading to the same encrypted network. We've also identified the buyers, including the one who spotted Natasha at the boutique. Dante's expression went cold and focused. How soon can we move? I need 48 hours to finalize details. But after that, we can take down the entire network at once. Servers, doctors, buyers, everything. Do it, Dante said. And make sure the evidence is preserved for prosecution. I want these men in prison, not just scattered. After Marco left, Natasha turned to Dante. I want to be part of this. The takedown. I need to see it happen. Absolutely not. His voice was firm. It's too dangerous. I'm not asking permission. Her voice was equally firm. This happened to me. Those are my photos, my violation. I need to be there when it ends. They stared at each other, both stubborn, both understanding the other's position. Finally, Dante sighed. You stay in a protected location. You can watch via video feed, but you don't go anywhere near the actual raid. That's non-negotiable. Fine, she agreed. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I can't lose you. Not when I just found you. You won't lose me, she promised. But we end this together. 2 days, he said. And then this nightmare is over. The morning of the raid arrived with cold December rain streaking the penthouse windows. Natasha woke early, Dante's arms still wrapped around her waist, and felt fear coil tight in her stomach. Today, everything would end. Either they'd successfully take down Dr. Carson's network, or something would go terribly wrong. Dante stirred beside her, immediately sensing her tension. Hey, he said quietly, pulling her closer. It's going to be fine. My team knows what they're doing. Promise me you'll be careful, she whispered against his chest. Always am. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. And you promise me you'll stay exactly where Marco puts you. No heroics. No heroics, she agreed. 2 hours later, she was in a secure location 3 blocks from the target building, a nondescript office that served as one of Dante's legitimate business fronts. Marco had set up a command center with multiple screens showing camera feeds from various angles. She could see Dante and his team assembled outside the medical facility, looking professional and dangerous in dark tactical gear. Her heart hammered watching them prepare to enter. This was real. This was happening. In minutes, they'd confront Dr. Carson and the other doctors who'd violated her and countless other women. They'd seize the servers, secure the evidence, End this nightmare once and for all. Dante's voice came through the speakers, calm and authoritative. All teams in position. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, go. The feeds showed simultaneous entry from multiple access points. Dante's team moved with military precision through the building, sweeping rooms, securing personnel. She saw Dr. Carson's shocked face as 2 of Dante's men detained him, saw the bank of servers in a locked room, saw other doctors trying to flee and being intercepted. It was efficient and controlled, over in less than 10 minutes. No shots fired, no violence necessary, just overwhelming force and superior planning. Marco was coordinating with someone about evidence preservation, making sure everything was documented properly for law enforcement. We've got them all, Dante's voice came through. 17 doctors in custody, servers secured. It's done, Natasha. It's over. Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. It was over. Dr. Carson couldn't hurt anyone else. The photos would be destroyed, the evidence given to police, justice would be served. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Then Marco's phone rang with a tone that made him go rigid. His face went pale as he answered. Boss, we have a problem. Richards, the buyer who spotted her at the boutique, he wasn't at his known location. And he just accessed the building security system. He knows where she is. Dante's cursing came through the speakers, followed by rapid-fire orders. Vincent, take half the team to Natasha's location now. Marco, lock down that building and don't let her out of your sight. I'm 3 minutes out. Marco was already moving, weapon drawn, positioning himself between Natasha and the door. We need to get you to the safe room. Now. But they didn't have time. The door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. A man filled the doorway, the same face she'd seen at the boutique, and he had a gun pointed directly at her. You cost me a lot of money, Richard said, his voice cold with rage. Photos I paid good money for, destroyed. A lucrative business relationship, ended. Someone needs to pay for that. Marco moved, but Richard swung the gun toward him. Don't even think about it. Drop your weapon, or I shoot her first. Natasha's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was it. This was the moment she'd been terrified of since seeing those men chase her through Manhattan streets. She was going to die here, 3 blocks away from Dante, because some sick predator valued photos of her violation more than human life. Drop it, Richards repeated, and Marco reluctantly set his weapon on the floor. Good boy. Now kick it over here. Richards kept the gun trained on Natasha. You know, I had plans for you. Private sessions. Extended access. You were supposed to be worth every penny I paid. Natasha felt bile rise in her throat, but forced herself to stay calm. She'd learned some things living with Dante these past days. How to assess threats, where to position yourself for maximum safety, how to buy time when you needed it. The photos are evidence now, she said, proud that her voice barely shook. Police have them. You're already finished. Maybe. But at least I'll have the satisfaction of making Rossi watch you die. He glanced at the monitors, showing the raid feeds. He thinks he's won. Let's see how victory feels when I take away what he values most. A shadow moved in the hallway behind Richards. Dante, moving with lethal silence, weapon raised. Natasha forced herself not to look, not to give away his presence. You don't have to do this, she said, keeping Richards's attention on her. Killing me won't get your money back. It won't save you from prosecution. No, but it'll feel good. He raised the gun, finger tightening on the trigger. Everything happened at once. Dante's voice, cold and deadly. Drop the weapon. Richards spinning toward the new threat. Marco diving for his own gun. A single shot that echoed deafeningly in the small space. Richards dropped, Dante's bullet finding its mark with precision born from years of practice. The man crumpled to the floor, his own weapon clattering harmlessly away. It was over in seconds, brutal and decisive and final. Dante crossed to Natasha in 2 strides, hands framing her face, eyes searching hers frantically. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? Talk to me, Natasha. I'm okay, she managed. Then her legs gave out, and he caught her, pulling her against his chest so tightly she could barely breathe. I'm okay. His whole body was shaking with a terror that matched her own. When I saw him pointing that gun at you, when I thought I might be too late, his voice cracked. I can't lose you. Do you understand me? I can't. You didn't lose me. I'm right here. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Vincent arrived with the rest of the team, immediately securing the scene. Marco was on the phone with law enforcement, explaining the situation in calm professional tones that belied the violence that had just occurred. Dante kept holding her, his face buried in her hair, and she could feel the aftershocks of fear running through his powerful frame. He'd killed for her, ended a life without hesitation to protect hers. She should be horrified, should be traumatized by witnessing death. But all she felt was safe. The aftermath was complicated and exhausting. Police interviews, statements, evidence review. The entire network had been dismantled in one coordinated strike. 17 doctors arrested, servers seized with thousands of photos and transaction records, dozens of buyers identified and being pursued by law enforcement. Dr. Carson was facing federal charges that would put him away for decades. But Richards was dead, killed in what would be ruled a justified shooting to protect a witness. Dante had saved her life, and in doing so, had ended another. The legal complications would take weeks to fully resolve, but his lawyers were confident there would be no charges. It was late evening by the time they finally returned to the penthouse. Natasha was exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear and relief all tangled together. Dante had barely let go of her hand since the shooting, his grip tight and constant like he needed physical proof she was still there. "You should eat something," he said, but neither of them moved toward the kitchen. "Dante," she turned to face him fully. "I need to say something." He looked at her with such intensity it stole her breath. "Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling about what happened today, about what I did, just say it. If you need distance, if you need time, if you need to leave, tell me now before I fall any deeper. I love you." The words hung between them, impossible to take back even if she wanted to. His eyes widened, surprise and hope, and something that looked like fear all warring in his expression. "You don't have to say that because I saved you," he said carefully. "Gratitude isn't the same as love. I'm not saying it because you saved me. I'm saying it because when I thought he might shoot you, when you stepped into that room knowing he had a gun, all I could think was that I couldn't lose you either." She stepped closer, her hands finding his chest. "I'm saying it because you held me while I cried and made me breakfast and introduced me to your mother. Because you see me, not my diagnosis, not my vulnerability, just me. Because you trusted me with your grief and your guilt and your mission. Because every morning for the past week, the first thing I wanted to see was your face." Natasha. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me. I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone. Never thought I deserved to after failing Gabriella. But you make me want to be better, to build something beyond violence and vengeance." "Then build it with me," she said. "I don't care about your world or your past or the danger. I care about you, about us, about the future we could have together." He kissed her then, deep and consuming, like he was trying to pour every emotion into that single point of contact. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Move in with me. Permanently. Not because you need protection, but because I need you here. Because this place hasn't felt like home until you were in it." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes to moving in. Yes to building something together. Yes to all of it. Marry me." She blinked, thrown by the sudden escalation. "What? I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a week and a half. But I also know that I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to protect you and cherish you and build a family with you. So marry me, Natasha Bennett. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." She should say it was too soon, that they needed more time, that people didn't get engaged after a week and a half no matter how intense the circumstances. But looking into Dante's green eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, she knew her answer. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." His smile was brilliant and genuine, transforming his whole face. "I'll get you a ring tomorrow. Something beautiful that does you justice. I don't need a ring right now. I just need you." They made love that night with a desperate intensity born from how close they'd come to losing each other. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a commitment, every whispered word a vow. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time and longer than she could remember, Natasha felt completely and utterly whole. Now, before we close this story, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in Natasha's position? Could you have trusted someone like Dante? Someone from a world so different from your own? Could you have found love in the midst of danger and violation? Sometimes our greatest connections come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the person who makes us feel safest is the one we least expected. If this story touched you, if you understand that journey from vulnerability to strength, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding protection, healing, and love in unexpected places. 6 months later, Natasha stood in the same penthouse that had become her home, watching the morning sun paint Manhattan in shades of gold. So much had changed since that terrible night when she'd fled Dr. Carson's office in terror. The trial had been swift and decisive. Dr. Carson and his network were serving lengthy federal sentences. The photos had been destroyed, the victims notified, and offered counseling services that Dante's foundation now funded in Gabriella's name. She'd gone back to work, but with new confidence born from surviving something that should have destroyed her. Her patients noticed the change, the way she carried herself with quiet strength. She still had her medical condition, still required regular monitoring, but it no longer defined her. It was just one part of a life that had become richer and fuller than she'd ever imagined. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Dante's embrace. "Morning, Mrs. Rossi," he murmured against her neck. She smiled at the title, still new enough to make her heart skip. They'd married quietly 3 months ago, just family and close friends, in a ceremony that Rosa had cried through from beginning to end. The ring on her finger was a simple platinum band with a single perfect diamond, elegant and understated just like she'd wanted. "Come back to bed," Dante said, but she shook her head. "Can't. I have a patient at 9. She turned in his arms to face him. "But tonight, we should talk about the brownstone your mother showed us. I think I want to put an offer in. You want to leave the penthouse?" He looked surprised. "I want space for the family we've talked about building. Kids need yards and separate bedrooms, not penthouses." She paused, then added softly, "I think Gabriella would like knowing we're creating something good from all this pain." His eyes went suspiciously bright. "She would." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Only about 5 times this morning." "Well, make it 6. I love you, Natasha Rossi. Thank you for choosing me." She thought about that terrible night, about running through dark streets in terror, about the moment she'd collided with a dangerous stranger who'd become her everything, about trusting her instincts despite every logical reason not to, about finding strength in vulnerability and love in the midst of chaos. "Thank you for making me feel safe," she said, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "Always," he promised. And standing in the morning light with the man she loved, with a future stretching bright and full before them, Natasha knew it was true. She'd survived violation and trauma and near death, and she'd come through it not broken but stronger. Not alone but beloved. Not vulnerable but powerful in ways she'd never imagined. Some love stories started with chance meetings in coffee shops or blind dates set up by well-meaning friends. Hers started with terror and ended with safety, with a dangerous man who kept every promise, with healing that came from being seen and valued exactly as she was. And that, she thought as Dante kissed her one more time before she had to leave for work, was the best kind of love story there was.